I stood stiffly on the stage in a crisp black suit, my forced smile beginning to twitch at the corners. This was supposed to be our engagement party, mine and Zoe Livingston's. All around us were friends and relatives from both families, packed into the room. The cheerful chatter had long since died down, replaced by a rising hum of confusion and murmured speculation. Because Zoe hadn't shown up. She was supposed to walk out on stage by now. She was in the back, in her dress, fully ready. But she wouldn't come out. The MC had gone backstage 3 times already, and each time she sent him away. "Mr. Robert," he said now, nervously wiping his forehead as he leaned toward me, "Miss Livingston's been on a video call this whole time. Her face doesn't look good. I really don't think I should go back there again." I clenched my jaw. Then I loosened it. Swallowed down the heat rising in my chest. I had a pretty good idea who she was talking to. Liam. Zoe and I had grown up together. We'd chased fireflies in the backyard, shared PB&J sandwiches in elementary school, and studied side by side all the way through college. From kindergarten to senior year, we were always at the same school, always side by side. Everyone said we were meant to be soulmates. The kind of love you only see in storybooks. Zoe herself once swore she'd never marry anyone but me. Said it with tears in her eyes and fire in her voice. She'd always brushed off other guys, never gave them a second look. Not even Liam. Liam came into our lives 7 years ago. Back then, Zoe and I were sophomores in college. He was a freshman. He was the kind of kid you'd expect to blend into the background, tall and wiry, clothes secondhand, manners humble. He came from a poor mountain town somewhere out in the sticks. But there was nothing shabby about him. Because his eyes sparkled. Not in some cheesy, poetic way, but really, truly lit up. Like stars. And from the moment Zoe stepped in to defend him, when the supermarket manager accused him of shoplifting and she called it out for the injustice it was, he couldn't stop looking at her. That's how it started. The boy fell in love with his heroine. But Zoe never liked him. She didn't like the breakfast he brought her every morning. She didn't like the water bottle he handed her after a badminton match. She didn't like the umbrella he held over her head in the rain. And she especially didn't like the way he insisted, over and over, that it was all just gratitude, that there were no feelings involved. But he kept doing it. For 7 years. Even after graduation, he got a job near our office, just to catch a glimpse of Zoe on her lunch break, to maybe bump into her in the lobby. You have to admire the persistence. But Zoe was mine. At least, she was, until she walked on stage. And for the sake of our family's reputations, I forced myself to hold back the fury boiling in my chest, waiting for her to appear. Zoe finally showed up. The hem of her wedding gown was uneven. Her hair a little messy. Her face pale with guilt and inner conflict, lips pressed into a tight line. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. Applause broke out, scattered and hopeful, as guests tried to recover the celebratory mood. The MC grabbed the mic, ready to start the ceremony. But Zoe ignored it all. She walked straight up to me, reached for my hand, and in a voice hoarse with emotion, said, "Robert, I'm sorry. I need to step away for a bit. Can we postpone the engagement, maybe a month?" "Why?" I asked, searching her face. Was it my eyes? Were they not as bright as Liam's? Because right now, I couldn't tell if she loved me at all. Zoe hesitated. Her gaze flickered, her voice faltered. It's just not a good day. Maybe next month we'll find a better one." "Is something wrong with Liam?" I cut to the heart of it. She froze. The color drained from her face. Then she gave me a smile so strained it barely held together. "Liam, he's in the hospital. Stage 4 cancer. The doctors say, he might not make it through the month. I had someone look into it. It's real." No wonder she took so long backstage. She has sent someone to verify it. It seems that what he said before was true. He is bound to the system and cannot conquer you. He will be punished. I nodded calmly. This wasn't new information. Liam had told Zoe years ago, if he couldn't win her heart, he'd die. It sounded like fantasy back then. Like something out of a messed up story. But Liam believed it with his whole being. He'd said it over and over again, he'd never love anyone but Zoe. "Yeah," Zoe muttered, her voice hollow. "And now he's getting what he said he would. A slow, painful punishment. Dying of cancer." She let out a breath, then pressed her lips together again. Zoe had always resented Liam. 7 years of relentless attention would do that to anyone. She'd long run out of patience. Once, she even hit him in a rage. She slapped him so hard that he fell and huddled on the floor, sobbing and apologizing. But he still loved her. He couldn't stop. Freak, she used to say. That was her word for him, harsh, simple, final. But now, she didn't sound so sure. This won't take long, I said, voice low and steady. Let's finish the ceremony. For the sake of both our families. We can deal with everything else afterward. It was a fair request. And it came from a place of dignity. The kind a man holds onto when everything else is slipping away. I didn't scream. Because I refused to be humiliated in front of everyone we knew. Not here. Not today. Zoe's face shifted again, torn between emotion and urgency. She lowered her eyes to the watch on her wrist. Then looked up, eyes darting. I need to go see him. I'll go alone. You stay, Robert. Take a break. She turned to leave. And that's when the fire I'd been holding back roared to life. I could feel it rising, filling my chest, searing the back of my throat. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. My eyes locked on her retreating figure. Were we really throwing it all away? Years of memories. The expectations of everyone who came here today. Was my entire family, about to become a joke to this town? Let's just finish the engagement, I said again, my voice hoarse and strained. It'll only take a minute. Zoe turned back to me and took a deep breath. Robert, I don't want to lie to you, she said softly. Liam told me that if I went ahead with this wedding, it would mean a complete failure of his mission. He would die, immediately. Her voice trembled with something dangerously close to tenderness. I know he can be exhausting, even creepy at times. But he's still someone who's loved me, obsessively, for 7 years. He doesn't deserve to die like that. I laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. So his mission wasn't over after all. Liam was still fighting. And Zoe, she was already gone. Her body was here, in front of me, but her heart was racing somewhere else. She wanted to run to him, now. This second. Not even for the sake of our engagement, or the two families watching with bated breath. I shook my head and let out a dry, humorless sigh. Turns out I was the one who failed the mission. Liam might have had some system guiding him toward Zoe, but wasn't I trying to win her all the same? Zoe took a step closer, seeing I had nothing left to say. She kissed me gently on the cheek. Robert, I do love you, she whispered, guilt bleeding through every word. But Liam, he's suffering. I can't just watch him die. Please forgive me. I'll come back. I promise. And then she turned and walked away. The whole room froze. Relatives and friends began shouting her name, calling after her in disbelief. But Zoe didn't even flinch. She headed straight for the exit. I lifted my gaze and watched her leave. Step by step. And when she reached the doors and pushed them open, something inside me snapped. The room spun. My head throbbed with a blinding pain. And then, darkness. Mission failed. All memories of Zoe will be erased. I woke up in a hospital bed to the sight of my parents' tear-streaked faces hovering over me, their eyes flooded with worry and relief. There were some relatives in the ward, as well as neighbors who were very nice to me, and Zoe's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Livingston. The moment I opened my eyes, my parents nearly collapsed with joy. They held my hands, touching my face like they had to be sure I was really awake. I can't believe it, Mr. Livingston said, looking pale and furious. Robert, thank God you're okay. My daughter, she's lost her damn mind. I swear, I'm gonna break her legs the minute I see her. That girl's out of control, added Mrs. Livingston, her eyes red and swollen. Please don't take it to heart, Robert. We'll talk some serious sense into Zoe. She's a disgrace, and we're so sorry for what she did. Zoe? The name stirred nothing in me. My mind felt like a blank slate. I stared at them, confused. Zoe, who? Don't Mr. and Ms. Livingston have only one daughter named Evelyn? Why is there a Zoe? When did Zoe come into the picture? My blank expression must have worried everyone because my parents started fussing again, touching my forehead, checking my hands, whispering frantically to each other. Then my mother burst into tears. Angry, bewildered tears. That damn Zoe, she cried. After all these years, after everything, she humiliated my son in front of the whole world. Running out on him at the engagement party like that. How's he supposed to hold his head up now? Mr. Livingston shook his head and sighed deeply. We've sent Evelyn to go find her. We're going to get to the bottom of this. I promise, Robert, you'll get an explanation. I rubbed my temples, a slow frown forming. Wait, who's Zoe? I asked quietly. A stunned silence fell over the room. Everyone just stared at me. My mother's face turned ghostly pale. She reached out, touching my head again, calling for the doctor in a panicked voice. Then the doctor came in and did another round of comprehensive testing, neurological tests, cognitive tests, and so on. Everything came back normal. Physically, I was fine. Ready for discharge, even. Except I didn't remember how I got here. And there were pieces missing, like whole chapters of my life had been torn out. In the end, the doctor recommended I stay for another 3 days, just for observation. If nothing changed, I'd be free to go. I stayed under observation for 3 days. My parents and the Livingstons refused to leave. They ate at the hospital cafeteria, took turns sleeping on the pull-out chair, and hovered over me like I was made of glass. Honestly, it was kind of overwhelming. It made sense coming from my mom and dad, but Mr. and Mrs. Livingston? They were being way too kind, and I didn't know how to respond to it. I kept insisting they go home, told them I was fine. But when I said it again that afternoon, the two of them exchanged a look, one of those long, loaded glances that told me something wasn't adding up. Robert, Mrs. Livingston said gently, her tone shifting. You really don't remember Zoe? You're our son-in-law, sweetheart. Of course we're going to take care of you. I blinked. Wait, what? Zoe again? Am I supposed to be married to her or something? That earned a soft chuckle from Mr. Livingston, though his face was tense. Well, you two were about to be engaged, he said. There was just an incident. He took the opportunity to fill me in. The engagement party. The plans. The history. He talked about how I used to walk dogs with Zoe when we were kids, how we climbed trees together and tried to rescue stray cats from rooftops. You were 7 when we all went to the beach, he said, eyes searching mine. Zoe got swept out by a wave, and you didn't even hesitate, you dove right in after her. If that lifeguard hadn't been there. His voice trailed off, and I could see how much he wanted me to remember. But I didn't. Not a flicker. I offered a tight, awkward smile. That's a pretty wild story. But I honestly don't remember any of it. His face fell. Mrs. Livingston let out a quiet sigh. Maybe it's just the shock. Maybe your mind's protecting you, blocking it all out. Robert, please, just focus on healing. Don't force yourself. I nodded. But inside, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just didn't know who Zoe was. So why would I be upset? On the second day in the hospital, the sun was shining, the breeze was warm, and I was in surprisingly good spirits. I scrolled through my phone with one hand while nibbling on a pastry with the other. Outside the room, Mr. Livingston was pacing the hallway, yelling into his phone. You ungrateful person. Robert is in the hospital and you don't even come to see him? What's wrong with you? You're busy. You'd better crawl over here even if you die. Hello, hello. He stared at his phone, jaw tight. The call had been cut off. With a groan, he dialed again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. Beside my bed, my mom gave a tired shake of her head. He's been calling since yesterday, she said quietly. Mr. and Mrs. Livingston must have dialed her number at least 50 times. She finally picked up once today. She looked furious. Disappointed. As for me, I just shrugged and went back to my phone, popping another piece of pastry into my mouth. Later that afternoon, Evelyn showed up. She was Mr. Livingston's daughter too, and my childhood friend. We'd been close for as long as I could remember. The moment she stepped in, she rushed to my side and looked me over. Her shoulders dropped the second she saw my color was good and I was sitting up, alert. Robert, thank God, she sighed. You look okay. I was so worried. Then her face twisted in frustration. And Zoe? God, don't get me started. I chewed her out already. She's such a freaking idiot. I swear, she's going to drive me to an early grave. She cursed. Evelyn never cursed. At least not in front of adults. That's how pissed she was. Mr. Livingston couldn't hold it in any longer. What the hell is going on? He demanded. Evelyn took a sip of water, then set the cup down with a sigh. It's Liam. Again, she said, her voice tight. He's always had a thing for Zoe, right? Remember that time he stood outside our house for an entire day and night in the pouring rain? Wouldn't leave? She rolled her eyes and continued, well, turns out he's dying. Cancer. Doesn't have much time left. So he asked Zoe to stay with him, to be there with him at the end. She paused for effect. And she said yes. The room went still. She packed up and moved into the oceanfront villa with him, Evelyn said, her tone sharpening with every word. Said she wanted Liam to spend his last days staring out at the waves. Can you believe that? Then her frustration boiled over. She slapped the table hard. I went out there, to that fancy house, she snapped. And I caught her spoon-feeding him like some damn love story. Liam looked like he'd won the freaking lottery. I wanted to scream. She'd clearly seen enough. Confronted Zoe, demanded answers, and gotten the whole picture. Across the room, my parents' faces were a storm of fury. My mom looked like she was about to explode. My dad clenched his jaw so hard I could hear the grind of his teeth. Mr. and Mrs. Livingston weren't faring much better. Mrs. Livingston swayed where she stood, her face white as a sheet. Mr. Livingston's fists balled at his sides. Zoe, he growled. You're unbelievable. Then, catching himself, he turned quickly to my parents, his voice laced with apology. I'm so sorry. I'll go find her myself. Drag her back if I have to. I'll make her get down on her knees and apologize to Robert. Mrs. Livingston nodded. Go now, she has crossed the line. Meanwhile, I blinked a few times, slowly, and popped another bite of pastry into my mouth. I was still lost in fog. Evelyn hesitated, then leaned in, her voice softer now. Robert, are you okay? I was fine. Why wouldn't I be? My phone was entertaining. The pastries were delicious. Life was peaceful. I'm good, I said, grinning. Actually, I'm having a great time. This whole Zoe situation? Kind of funny, honestly. Everyone in the room exchanged baffled looks. My parents looked like they were about to cry, or explode. Probably both. My mom pulled aside a nurse and demanded another neurological exam, convinced I'd lost my mind. The results came back the same as before. Physically and mentally sound. But no one believed it. They all looked at me like I was some kind of walking ghost. Mr. Livingston didn't say a word. He just turned on his heel and stormed out to find Zoe. And on the third day, he brought her back. The hospital room filled quickly, my parents, Evelyn, and Mrs. Livingston all there, bracing themselves. Zoe walked in, eyes darting to me immediately. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of guilt and worry. Robert, she said softly, are you okay? I wanted to come sooner, I really did. But Liam just got discharged, and his condition is still so bad, I had to take care of him first. She stepped closer, carefully sitting at the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, she said. I looked at her. And to be honest, she was stunning. Tall, maybe 5'9". Long, elegant limbs. Sharp features, big expressive eyes. She looked like she walked straight out of a magazine. I tilted my head. Mr. and Mrs. Livingston, since when did you have another daughter? I gave her a smile. Gotta say, she's beautiful. Zoe froze. Her brow furrowed, and she reached out to touch my hand. Robert, it's me. Zoe. We grew up together. Don't do this, don't say things just to hurt me. Before she could finish, I instinctively pulled my hand away. I frowned. Who the hell did she think she was, grabbing me like that? Zoe blinked, startled. Then lowered her eyes and gave a bitter smile. My dad said you had memory loss, she murmured. But I know better. You're pretending. You hate me now. And I deserve it. She reached for my hand again. That time, I didn't just pull away, I yanked it back with force. What are you doing? I snapped. Don't touch me. My frown deepened, my tone edged with sharp irritation. This woman was beautiful, sure. But she was also a stranger. Zoe hadn't expected me to react so strongly, to actually shake her off like that. Her hand hung in the air for a beat before she drew it back, her face flushing with humiliation. She bowed her head and pressed it into her hands. Her voice came out hoarse. I won't touch you again. I know I hurt you, deeply. But Liam, he's dying. She looked up at me, eyes red, voice trembling. You know he's going to die. He's had a miserable life, Robert. No money, no family support. He's never had a single good day. Her voice grew stronger as she went on. He gave me 7 years of his life. 7 years of youth and love he'll never get back. And now he's facing death. How could I just turn my back on that? How could I let him suffer alone? She stared straight at me. Is someone's life really less important than a damn engagement party? My parents practically jumped out of their seats. Mr. Livingston smacked his palm against the side of Zoe's head, not hard, but loud enough to startle everyone. Shut your mouth, he barked. This isn't about an engagement party. This is about priorities. About right and wrong. Liam? Liam is dying, sure, but who matters more? Him or Robert? Dad, that's not fair, Zoe fired back, clutching her head. Liam has cancer. He's given up everything for me. The room erupted into shouting. And me? I just sat there, more annoyed than anything else. I didn't care about the engagement party. I didn't care who was more important. I just didn't want this stranger touching me again. Enough, I said flatly. I don't want to see you. Please leave. My voice was calm. Detached. My parents echoed the sentiment, practically throwing her out with their glares. Zoe's lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. Slowly, she stood up. Robert. I just hoped you'd understand, she said softly. Liam has suffered so much. And the happiness we've had, it's everything he's never had. Her eyes shimmered with something, pity? Defiance? You want to pretend you've forgotten me? Fine. You want to hate me? I deserve that too. But please, have some compassion. Give Liam the kindness I couldn't. I stared at her. What on earth was she talking about? Seriously, what was she even saying? I'm sorry, I said, my voice dry. I really don't know who you are. As for Liam, I think we went to college together. He did seem like a guy who had it rough. You should take good care of him. Love him. Be happy. I meant it. Honestly. If they were so in love, they should go live that romantic tragedy out together. Grow old. Have kids. Whatever. Zoe let out one last long sigh. I'll come back, when you're not so angry anymore. And with that, she turned and walked out, ignoring Evelyn's shouted insults, Mr. Livingston's rage, and Mrs. Livingston's attempts to block the door. That night, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in, thick sheets of rain pounding the windows, thunder cracking like gunfire overhead. I jolted awake in the middle of the night, heart racing. Pathetic as it was, I'd always been terrified of thunderstorms. It started when I got lost during a camping trip as a kid. I was 7, caught alone in a downpour, screaming my lungs out while lightning lit up the sky. Since then, thunder felt less like weather and more like a monster snarling outside my door. The room was quiet. My parents and the Livingstons were probably asleep in the overnight room down the hall. I didn't want to wake anyone, so I just lay there, under the covers, scrolling on my phone, the storm booming in the background. But then my mom showed up. She walked in, caught sight of me wide-eyed under the covers, and gave a knowing smile. This thunder, she said, chuckling softly, I knew you wouldn't be able to sleep through it. I smiled back, a little sheepish. She walked over, placed her hand gently on my forehead, and sighed. You know, she said after a beat, Zoe used to run over in the middle of the night whenever there was a storm. Umbrella in hand, soaking wet, just to sit with you. She knew you wouldn't be able to sleep. Really? I asked. Oh yeah, she nodded. I remember once, right after we found you, after that trip when you got lost, it stormed again a few days later. You cried all night, and Zoe came running barefoot to our door, shouting your name. Told you not to be scared. Poor thing caught a fever from standing in the rain. Was out for days. She chuckled at the memory. She hit her growth spurt early, you know. Taller than you back then. Looked just like a big sister fussing over her little brother. I gave her a noncommittal smile. That's sweet, but sounds kind of dumb, doesn't it? She paused, studying my face. Then carefully asked, you really don't remember Zoe? So even she thought I might be faking. After all, the tests showed nothing wrong with me. I looked her in the eye. Mom, I said firmly, I don't know Zoe. I don't like Zoe. And frankly, the first impression she gave me? Not great. Please, let's just not bring her up again. She looked thoughtful for a moment. Then nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "If that's how you feel." After I was discharged, Mr. Livingston drove us to their family's estate. The housekeeper had lunch waiting, and the Livingstons' extended family had already gathered. Apparently, they were throwing a little celebration for my recovery. "Robert," Mr. Livingston said as soon as we walked in, his tone heavy with guilt, "we're here today not just to celebrate your recovery, but also to apologize. We didn't raise Zoe right, and I hope you won't hold it against us." I quickly waved him off. He'd spent the past few days by my side at the hospital, taking care of me like I was his own son. He didn't owe me anything more. Lunch turned into a cheerful affair. Toasts were raised, laughter filled the air, and one by one, the relatives all took their turns trying to smooth things over, each urging me, in their own way, to forgive Zoe. They were clearly worried. The Livingston family and my family have close business ties. Our villa is next door. If my relationship with Zoe fell apart, it wouldn't just be messy, it would be messy for everyone. But the truth was, I didn't even know who Zoe was. Still, I stood up and smiled politely. "Uncles, aunts," I began, "you've all been friends with my parents for years. No matter what happens between me and Zoe, it won't affect the bond between our families. I promise." That seemed to ease some tension. Mrs. Livingston chimed in, "Perfectly timed, Robert, once Zoe's back, we'll host a proper engagement ceremony for you. A grand one. You won't be slighted, not again." As if on cue, the butler appeared at the dining room entrance. "Miss Zoe has returned," he announced. Every head in the room turned toward the door. Mr. Livingston lit up. "I gave that girl a good talking to. Looks like she finally came to her senses. She must be here to apologize." But his expression changed in an instant. Because Zoe wasn't alone. Standing beside her, pale and shaky, was Liam. He was tall and rail-thin, wearing a white coat and a thick beanie. He looked like a ghost, coughing into his fist, clutching Zoe's hand like it was his lifeline. The entire room fell silent. Mr. Livingston's face went from surprise to livid. "Zoe," he shouted. "Have you lost your mind? Do you have no shame?" Let go of his hand. Liam flinched. His already frail frame shrank in on itself, eyes dropping to the floor, his shoulders trembling. Zoe stepped in, protective. "Dad, please don't scare him. Ever since the diagnosis, he's been so anxious. Last night's thunderstorm shook him up, and with the winds at the beach getting worse, I thought it was safer to bring him here." She paused, glancing around the room. "I didn't know you were all having lunch here. The house is usually empty." "Shut your mouth," Mr. Livingston barked. "You've completely lost it. Get out, both of you. Take Liam and go." Liam said nothing. Just stood there, silent, head bowed. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Curiosity got the better of me. I hadn't seen Liam in years, not since college, and now, standing across the room, pale and sickly, he looked like a ghost from another life. So I stepped forward. I held out a hand toward Mr. Livingston, signaling him to take a breath, to calm down. Zoe met my gaze for a split second, then quickly looked away, her eyes full of unease and guilt. I ignored her. I only had eyes for Liam. He looked up at me with a weak, awkward smile. His skin was ghost white, his features sharp from the weight he'd clearly lost, but his eyes. God, his eyes still had that same glow. Even in his condition, they sparkled, brighter than the stars outside. Back in college, Liam had always looked out of place. His clothes were worn, his posture unsure, and there was a quiet tension about him, like he never quite felt like he belonged. Now, he looked even more fragile. Like one strong gust of wind would knock him over. "Liam," I said, smiling casually. "It's been a long time." He froze. Stared at me like he couldn't figure out what I was playing at. Zoe jumped in, voice tense. "Robert, this is all my fault. Don't take it out on Liam, I'll take him away right now." She turned to leave, gripping Liam's hand. I stepped forward. "He can't even stand up straight," I said plainly. "Why are you dragging him all over the place? Let him stay here. The air's clean, the setting's calm. We have private doctors on call, it's the best place for someone in recovery." Liam just stared. Zoe didn't. She stiffened, then scowled. Something about my calm, my politeness, my so-called kindness, clearly rubbed her the wrong way. Like she couldn't stand it. "Robert, what the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped. "I told you we'd delay the engagement by a month, and now you're playing games? Is this how you get back at me, using Liam to prove a point? He's dying, she hissed. He has weeks, maybe less. Can't you just let him feel some happiness? She was practically shaking with anger. I blinked at her, utterly confused. I'm not playing games, I said calmly. First, I'm not joking. Second, I'm not getting engaged to you, now or in a month, because I don't like you. And third, I really don't know who you are. So maybe watch your tone when you speak to me. Silence. The room fell dead quiet. No one said a word. Not my parents. Not the Livingstons. Not even Evelyn. Liam stood motionless. And Zoe? Zoe's eyes flashed. Without another word, she yanked Liam's hand and stormed into the house. Fine, she shouted. Real nice, Robert. Keep pretending you've forgotten everything. You know what? You're right, this is the perfect place for Liam to recover. Let's stay. She was fuming now. All fire and fight. Mr. Livingston lunged after her, red in the face. Zoe. You don't bring strangers into this house without permission. Zoe didn't even turn around. Robert gave his permission, she snapped. Zoe was furious, so of course, Liam moved in. The Livingston relatives were livid, fuming on my behalf like it was a personal insult to every last one of them. As for me? I didn't care. In fact, I was ready to go home. Thankfully, we all lived in the same gated community, and my family's villa was right next door. The moment we got back, my parents launched into a fresh round of outrage, cursing Zoe to hell and back, huffing about how badly I'd been treated. A grown man, dumped by his fiancée, publicly, no less, and now she dragged another man, her dying lover, into her childhood home like it was no big deal. It was disgraceful. Humiliating. At least, that's what they said. I didn't feel humiliated. Not even a little. If anything, I felt relieved. Zoe, whoever she was someone else's problem now. Night fell, and with it came another summer storm. The rain hit fast and hard, drenching the earth in minutes. Thunder roared through the sky like it wanted to tear the clouds apart. I couldn't sleep. My mind drifted back to something Mom had said, how Zoe used to show up during storms, just to keep me company. Said I couldn't sleep unless she was there. But she definitely won't come at this time. After all, her Liam has become timid after being diagnosed with cancer and is afraid of thunder. Barely audible through the downpour, but my phone lit up with a security alert. Someone was at the gate. In this weather? My mom went to answer it. A moment later, I heard her voice in the foyer. Then another voice, higher, fast, desperate. Robert's scared of thunder. Zoe said breathlessly. He's always needed me during storms, every single time it rains like this, he can't sleep unless I'm with him. My mom's voice was sharp. Robert's already asleep. Go home. I'm sorry, Zoe said, her voice cracking. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have yelled at him today. I love him so much, and I messed everything up. Please, can I just go up and see him? No, my mom snapped. You can't. There was a long silence. Then Zoe let out a sigh. Then please tell him this, she said softly. Tell him I know he hasn't forgotten me. And that I'll wait. For his forgiveness, for as long as it takes, even if it's the rest of my life. I shivered. It wasn't the storm. That was just gross. I got goosebumps. Suddenly, thunder wasn't so scary anymore. I turned on the lamp, sat up, and reached for my water bottle. As I sipped, I glanced out the window, which had a clear view of the Livingstons' third-floor room. A light was still on. And in the window, a tall, thin figure stood silently, watching my house. I froze. It was Liam. He looked like a ghost, just standing there, rigid and pale, eyes locked in my direction. Waiting for Zoe, probably. Or maybe haunting me. Either way, I dropped the curtain. Fast. No thank you. I'd like to sleep without nightmares tonight. The heavy rain last night had rinsed everything clean. The air was thick with the earthy scent of wet soil. Evelyn showed up at my place out of nowhere. I was in the middle of breakfast when she barged in and snatched my milk without so much as a hello. Robert, I swear, I feel awful, she groaned. I'm stuck living with Liam now, my parents went back to work at the firm, and I'm just miserable. Back at her place, it was just her, Zoe, and Liam. My parents are furious. They cut off Zoe's credit cards, but she's got her own stash and the temper of a dragon. She actually said if we try to kick Liam out, she'll kill herself. Evelyn didn't stop ranting. I couldn't help smirking. Such passionate stupidity, almost touching in its own way. Robert, I seriously need a break. I can't stay at home another minute. Let's get out of here, do something fun. How about the alumni weekend at our old college? It's tomorrow, she said suddenly. I blinked. Alumni weekend? Right. My alma mater was hosting its big anniversary celebration, and all us former students were invited back to campus. Evelyn went to the same college as me, just a few years behind. Why do you suddenly want to go to the school anniversary? I asked Evelyn. She shrugged. The school called Zoe this morning, invited her to give a speech, no less. One of the school's legendary, twin stars. Of course she got an invite. Why not me, huh? I'm doing fine. I make $3,000 a month, thank you very much. She was being sarcastic about herself. The truth is, Evelyn was using some fake job title just to make it look like she had a job. Her real pocket money? $100,000 a month. I couldn't stop myself from laughing, though something about it nagged at me. Twin stars? I didn't remember there being two. Wasn't there only one back in our day? Monica, that was her name. Monica had always been the brightest star in our school's history. During my college years, her trophies were everywhere. She aced 3 out of 9 advanced electives. She won first place in the National Undergraduate Physics Competition. She was the first student in our university's history to clinch the top prize in the International Mathematical Modeling Contest. And that was just the beginning. She was brilliant, so brilliant that I remembered her vividly, even years later. Last I heard, she'd gone abroad. Multiple top-tier universities had courted her, and chances were, she'd settled down somewhere overseas. Robert, are you even listening? Evelyn waved her hand in front of my face. So, are we going or not? The reunion could be fun. We might bump into some old friends. She was buzzing with excitement. Honestly, I wasn't too keen on it. Zoe had been invited, after all, and I had zero interest in running into her. But then again, why should I avoid her? It's not like she meant anything to me anymore. Just another face in the crowd. Yeah, I said. Let's go. We showed up ready to have a good time. By the time the anniversary weekend kicked off, Evelyn and I had already eaten our way through half the food stalls on campus. Satisfied and a little winded, we jogged toward the auditorium. That was where the main ceremony would be held, spacious, bright, lined with rows of seats facing a wide stage. Rumor had it there'd be a dance party right after the speeches, full-on alumni nostalgia and college chaos. Outside the hall, 2 posters were on display. One featured Zoe. The other, Monica. Zoe's inclusion wasn't a surprise, her resume was impressive, and she came from serious money. She'd been donating to the school year after year. Of course they'd ask her to speak. But Monica? She'd been a ghost for years. Not a word, not a whisper. It was only from that poster that I learned she was now a professor at Oxford. Not just any professor, she was the youngest tenured professor in the university's history. And she was a woman. Damn, Evelyn breathed. Oxford is as elite as it gets. Monica really is one of a kind. No one from our schools reached that level since she graduated. She pulled out her phone and snapped a flurry of photos. Still gorgeous, too. I rolled my eyes. You're seriously fangirling? Over a woman? She's perfect, Evelyn said, unapologetically starstruck. I didn't bother looking again. I tugged her by the arm and we headed inside. The auditorium was buzzing with old classmates, familiar faces floating through the crowd. We exchanged pleasantries here and there before the ceremony officially began. The president and a few board members gave the usual opening speeches. Then Zoe was invited to the stage. She looked radiant today, like some kind of angel who'd descended from the clouds. The applause that erupted the moment she stepped up was proof enough of her popularity. She's still got it, Evelyn muttered. Too bad she's a total idiot when it comes to life choices. I said nothing. After Zoe finished, Monica took the stage. Her reception was quieter. Not because she lacked brilliance, but because she'd always kept to herself, distant, reserved, almost untouchable. Even when people admired her, they never truly knew her. I watched her closely. Her beauty was different from Zoe's. Zoe was like a goddess who walked among us, dazzling and dramatic. Monica? She was a mythical deer hidden in the mist, elusive, silent, and utterly captivating. Monica's speech marked the climax of the reunion. The auditorium transformed into a buzzing afterparty. Alumni, some vibrant, others polished with age, mingled over cocktails and conversation, laughter echoing under the warm lights. Evelyn, ever the foodie, darted from table to table sampling everything in sight. Before long, she vanished into the crowd. I went looking for her, only to find Zoe heading in my direction. As always, she drew eyes like a magnet. Every step she took seemed to pull the room's attention along with her, like she carried her own spotlight. I had to admit, she was impressive. But I had no interest in talking to her. That very first impression had already soured anything I might have thought about her. "Robert," she said, her voice threading through the noise. "Didn't expect to see you here." Her expression was complicated. I said nothing. Unbothered, she forged ahead, forcing the conversation. "Did you come just to see me? It's rare that I give a speech, how'd I do?" I frowned. Was she for real? "Zoe," I said coldly, "I'm just here to enjoy the reunion. And for the record, I don't even know you. So maybe watch how you talk, okay?" A hush fell over the nearby guests. Curious glances flickered our way. Zoe's smile faltered. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and then suddenly, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the side of the room. "What the hell are you doing?" I snapped. "Robert, are you telling me there's not even a shred of anything between us?" Her voice cracked with emotion, half defiant, half wounded. "Fine, I screwed up, but do you have to keep humiliating me like this?" "No," I shot back, my patience gone. "There isn't even a shred. Because I don't know you. How many times do I have to say it? I don't know you." Her eyes welled with tears instantly, glassy and shimmering with hurt. "Fine. Keep pretending you don't remember," she said bitterly, her voice trembling as she forced a breath through her nose. Then she turned and stalked across the floor toward a guy standing nearby. Flashing a sugary sweet smile, she asked him to dance. The guy lit up like he'd just won the lottery and eagerly took her hand. Zoe didn't even try to hide the glance she shot back at me, deliberate, pointed, meant to sting. I was still processing the absurdity of it all when a gentle voice spoke behind me. "Robert," it said, soft and warm. "It's been years. Care for a dance?" I turned, and there she was. Monica. Smiling at me. Youth an austere, distant beauty. The contrast was striking. I blinked and pointed at myself. "You mean me?" "Yes, Robert," she said, still smiling. I gave her a skeptical look. "You know who I am?" "Back in college, I was practically invisible." She let out a quiet laugh. "Hardly. You were one of the top students in the Lit and Language program. And during the debate tournament, you completely destroyed me. I've never forgotten." I paused, trying to recall. "Oh, right. That did happen. Back then, I'd signed up for the debate club on a whim, mostly just to spar with some bright minds and get out of my routine. Somehow, I'd ended up winning the whole thing. Turns out, Monica had been one of my opponents. Not that I'd noticed at the time. To be honest, I hadn't paid much attention to any of the girls around me back then. I remember the topic was which is more important, love or life. We chose love, and you chose life. Monica nodded, eyes reflecting the memory. We were doomed from the start. Nothing trumps life, right? Guess I got lucky, I said modestly. She chuckled, the sound light and genuine. No, you won because you were sharp. You had this relentless energy, like nothing could hold you back. I remember thinking, you were like a tree clinging to the edge of a cliff. So alive. So full of fight. What kind of metaphor was that? Still, I could tell it was meant as a compliment, and honestly, I didn't mind it. So I accepted her invitation and danced with her, otherwise it would be so boring. I took Monica's hand without hesitation and led her into the dance floor. To my surprise, she moved with the grace of someone well-versed in ballroom dancing, nothing like the cold, untouchable academic she seemed to be. In that moment, she was radiant, like a white rose in full bloom. You dance often? I teased. She looked up at me with warm eyes. Yes. You will learn it after dancing for a while. There was something intense about the way she looked at me, hot, almost smoldering. It didn't match the image I had of her at all. And yet, it wasn't uncomfortable. There was admiration in her gaze. Appreciation. Something sincere that caught me off guard. Feeling suddenly self-conscious, I searched for a distraction. So, you haven't been back in years. What brought you here this time? She twirled lightly before replying, I'm settling in the UK for good. This might be the last time I come back. I nodded, watching her move with quiet elegance. All around us, the music curled through the air, soft and melodic. Alumni laughed, clinked glasses, relived their youth under dim lights and polished floors. It was the kind of moment that tasted like college, like time bottled up and uncorked just for one night. Then someone slammed into Monica. She staggered, nearly falling. I frowned and turned. It was Zoe, and her dance partner. She looked furious, her expression dark as a storm. She'd done it on purpose. Monica steadied herself, caught her balance, and met Zoe's glare with calm composure. She didn't say a word, only signaled to me that we should leave. Don't move, Zoe snapped. She shoved past her stunned partner and stormed toward us, grabbing my other hand. Monica's tone sharpened, her face tightening. Zoe, what are you doing? Zoe's voice rose. Monica, are you seriously pretending you didn't know Robert is my fiancé? What the hell do you think you're doing? The music dimmed around us. People turned to look. Whispers buzzed like static. I felt a headache coming on. Zoe, are you out of your mind? I yanked my hand free from hers, ready to disappear. Monica wasn't interested in being humiliated either. She stepped with me toward the edge of the room. But Zoe wasn't done. Monica, she shouted after us, shaking with anger. I'm trying to keep things civil, but you're really pushing it. Don't mistake my silence for weakness. This wasn't the poised, immaculate Zoe people knew. This was something unhinged. Something raw. Monica stopped cold. Her voice remained soft, but the authority in it cut through the air like glass. Zoe, do you want to be thrown out of here? The threat was unmistakable. And it sent Zoe over the edge. With a snarl, she launched forward and punched Monica straight in the face, clean, sharp, practiced. Blood spilled from Monica's nose, and the crowd gasped. But Monica wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She recovered fast and struck back, clean form, focused power. The two women clashed, beautiful and furious. It was surreal. Shocking. For a split second, I just stood there, stunned. Zoe I could understand, she'd always had a flair for the dramatic. But Monica? She was supposed to be the calm one. The logical one. What kind of fire had she been hiding all this time? I dove between them, trying to pull them apart as others rushed in to help. Both women were bleeding. Monica's nose was still trickling crimson. Zoe had a split lip, red and swelling. Robert, come with me. Zoe pushed past the others, reaching for my arm again. Monica didn't say a word. She just looked at me. And I knew what she was asking. She didn't have to beg. Didn't even have to speak. I wrapped my arm around her and led her away. Let's get you to a hospital. Behind me, Zoe stood frozen, speechless. Robert, you, she stammered, unable to finish. I turned to glance at her one last time. Her face was a mess of disbelief and something else, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. She was finally afraid of losing me. I walked Monica over to the campus health center. Her wound wasn't too serious. A nurse cleaned it up and patched it with a bandage. That was it. You out of your mind? I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. A professor from Oxford, getting into a fight at a party? Seriously? You're not even a little embarrassed. Monica laughed. It was the kind of laugh that made you wonder if she had really lost it. Tell me, Mr. Debater, she said, tilting her head. Which one matters more, life or love? For a moment, it was like déjà vu. She was back on the debate stage all those years ago, poised, sharp, eyes cool as ice, throwing a question my way like it was a dart meant to land dead center. I blinked, caught off guard, then reached over and smacked the back of her head. You've become a fool. I think love matters more, she said, completely serious. Because without love, life's just a shell. And what's the point of a shell walking around? It's as good as dead. I sighed. All right. Love wins. You win. She laughed again. That same reckless, bright laugh. She seemed unusually happy tonight, glowing, almost. But the sky had gone dark, and I had somewhere else to be. Evelyn was probably off hunting for dessert again. I waved her off. Guess this is goodbye. If fate wants it, we'll run into each other again. After all, she was flying back overseas soon. And fate, well, it's not the most dependable thing. Monica opened her mouth, then closed it again. Something flickered behind her eyes, something she wanted to say but buried instead. I'm heading out, I said with a casual wave. She called after me just as I reached the door. Robert, are you still planning to marry Zoe? I stopped cold. So she knew. She knew about me and Zoe, even though I didn't remember a damn thing. You came back on purpose? I turned slowly to face her. Who sent you? Liam told me you and Zoe broke up, she said without flinching. That's why I came back. I hit Zoe because I was mad for you. Liam? She hit Zoe, for me? In that moment, everything clicked. Monica had been played. Liam had used her. He was always too clever for his own good. First, he pulled the cancer card, reeling in Zoe's sympathy, keeping her from getting engaged to me. But Zoe still loved me. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. So Liam brought Monica back. Made her the other woman. The perfect wedge. If Monica could pull me away from Zoe, then Zoe would have no choice but to fall back on Liam. And just like that, Liam's plan would fall into place. You were a pawn, I said quietly, shaking my head. Monica gave a soft laugh. That's not the point. Didn't you realize I was confessing my feelings to you? Oh, I noticed. I smirked. Looks like back in college, I didn't just beat you in debate, I stole your heart too. The smugness came out before I could stop it. Male ego, what can I say? She sat on the edge of the clinic bed, looking up at me. You haven't changed. You're still that tree clinging to the edge of a cliff, stubborn, swaying with pride, soaking in sunlight and spring wind like nothing can touch you. Thanks, I think, I chuckled. Then can I be the little patch of grass growing beside you? She asked, half teasing, half serious. Be careful. I waved and turned away. The rocks are sharp. The grass doesn't grow well there. Consider this carefully. And with that, I walked out. I caught up with Evelyn on the campus walkway. She was looking for me too, clearly worked up. Robert, did Zoe and Monica actually get into a fight? She asked, exasperated. Unbelievable. Could they be any more embarrassing? Let them fight, I muttered, steering her in the direction of home. It was already late by the time we got back. The house was empty, no parents around. Evelyn had decided she was staying over. No way was she going back to share a roof with Liam tonight. My parents gave Zoe an ultimatum, she said brightly as we walked in. If she doesn't kick Liam out by tomorrow, they're throwing him out themselves, literally. With force. Can you believe that? I'm thrilled. She trailed behind me, talking a mile a minute as we stepped inside. Mr. and Mrs. Livingston really tried to be civilized, you know? Even gave Zoe a deadline, she continued, practically giddy with schadenfreude. She's spoiled, I said, kicking off my shoes. Your parents were way too soft on her. No argument there. But don't act innocent, Robert, she said, giving me a sharp side eye. You're the one who let Liam move into our house. If it weren't for you, my parents would have never put up with this crap. Yeah. I guess that one's on me. Anyway, we made ourselves a couple of steaks for dinner. Nothing fancy, just something to fill the late-night hunger. We'd barely finished eating when the doorbell rang. Evelyn jumped up to answer it. The moment the door opened, I heard her snap, Liam? What the hell are you doing here? I raised an eyebrow and walked over. Sure enough, there he was. Liam stood there in a white coat, bundled in a thick knit hat, looking like he'd walked out of a blizzard. His face was ghostly pale. I came to see Robert, he said calmly. He doesn't want to see you. Get lost, Evelyn snapped, trying to shut the door in his face. But Liam didn't flinch. Zoe called me earlier. Told me to get ready, he said. She's going to marry me. Evelyn froze. Excuse me? Say that again? Zoe's going to marry me, he repeated, his voice steady. Evelyn's face turned red with rage. She looked ready to slap the smug right off him. Evelyn, I said, stepping in, go upstairs. I need to talk to Liam. Alone. Robert, he's not a good man. Don't listen to his bullshit, she hissed, standing her ground. I shot her a look. She huffed, then stomped up the stairs, one reluctant step at a time. Now it was just me and Liam. Without asking, he strolled inside like he owned the place. His eyes scanned the living room, then landed on the wine cabinet across the room. Dozens of bottles of aged reds, glowing under soft lighting. "I'd like a glass," he said, nodding toward the collection. I grabbed a bottle of red wine and motioned for Liam to sit. He took a seat at the dining table, those bright eyes of his fixed squarely on me. They'd always been that way, luminous, burning with something too intense for someone his age. I uncorked the wine and poured him a glass. He took it with both hands, staring into the slow swirl of crimson like it held all the answers he'd ever wanted. I poured one for myself, took a small sip, and asked, "So what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. He took a delicate sip, closed his eyes, and sighed like it was the finest thing he'd ever tasted. "God, that's good. That one's the cheapest bottle we have," I said flatly. He didn't flinch. "Robert, you know what my dream was? To be able to drink red wine like you, calm, collected, classy." "That's your dream?" I said, raising a brow. He nodded, choosing his words carefully. "When I was 7, the village had an outdoor movie screening. I sat in the dirt, covered in mud, and watched a blurry scene on a wrinkled screen, a city guy, dressed sharp, legs crossed, sipping red wine. He looked so elegant, so untouchable. I never forgot that image." A faint smile touched his lips. Some of the color returned to his face. I leaned back and crossed my legs. "And then?" "Then I worked my ass off. Finished my chores, studied every spare second. I broke pen after pen, or the skin off my fingers from writing so much. I became the first college student in my entire village. My parents had to borrow money just to get me to LA. They bent their backs under the weight of life. Their eyes burned from the sweat. But they did it. They got me here." His voice caught. His eyes had turned red. He took another sip, then swirled the wine in his glass, staring into it as though it might disappear. "I made it to college. I thought, finally, this is it, I can make something of myself. Be a scientist. A businessman. A government official. Hell, even just a clean-cut guy with a 9-to-5. I thought, finally, I could cross my legs, sip red wine like that guy in the movie, graceful, confident, powerful. And I'd buy my parents a bottle too. They deserved that much." I sat in silence. I knew that story all too well. Kids from towns like his don't dream of yachts or penthouses. For them, one glass of wine, real wine, not cheap booze, is a lifetime aspiration. "So what, you're trying to marry Zoe for her money?" I asked. "Plan on freeloading your way into a wine-soaked future?" "No," Liam said, shaking his head with a sad smile. "No, Robert. You don't understand me at all." His smile wilted into something darker. "I had a future. I had a real shot at pulling my family out of poverty. I could almost taste it, this dream, this glass of wine. It was right there, just within reach. But, I'm bound by the system. I want to capture Zoe." "Huh, how ridiculous. I've spent 7 years of my life and youth to capture a woman and become her humble licker." He let out a bitter laugh. It started low, then rose louder and louder, bubbling into something manic. Tears welled up in his eyes, then fell fast, like a sudden storm ripping down a mountainside. "Do you know what that's like?" he said, voice cracking. "To be forced into it? To throw away everything just to be someone's lapdog? I couldn't focus on school. I couldn't improve. I couldn't complete assignments. Everything revolved around Zoe. And if I pushed back, if I resisted, I'd die." Liam slammed the wine glass down hard. Red droplets splashed onto his hand, staining it like blood. He shook them off, locked eyes with me. I couldn't afford 3 meals a day, but I still bought her breakfast. I hate badminton, but I stood on the sidelines, cheering like a fool. I've got a weak immune system, one rainstorm and I get a fever, but I still held an umbrella over her head. And the whole time, the system held a wire around my neck. Tight. Unforgiving. Like it would slice my throat the second I stepped out of line. Liam kept talking. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but he wiped them away quickly, as if embarrassed by his own breakdown. I stared at him, trying to process everything. "So, you never actually liked Zoe?" His response was immediate, unwavering. "Men like me don't get to dream about love. I've only ever dreamed of that glass of red wine." He let out a dry chuckle, but his eyes were empty. "No man would willingly waste 7 years of his life chasing a woman. Love? It's not even worth 7 days of my time." The way he said it, sharp, final, left no room for argument. I didn't know what to say. Liam sniffled and exhaled like he was finally letting go of something that had weighed on him for far too long. I'm the one who tricked Monica into coming back. I knew she had feelings for you, ever since your old debate, the one about whether life or love matters more. I watched the whole thing from the sidelines. He gave a crooked, bitter smile. She didn't let me down. Pushed Zoe right over the edge. Zoe was so furious, so jealous, she blacked out. Now she wants revenge, on you. That's why she said she'd marry me. He looked at me, his smirk laced with sarcasm. I know what she's doing. She's hoping you'll stop her. That you'll run to the altar and beg her not to go through with it. Liam leaned forward slightly, voice lower now. So that's why I'm here. I'm asking you, just this once, don't stop her. Let her go through with it. Let me finish this damn mission. And just like that, everything became clear. Zoe wasn't in love with Liam. She was using the engagement to provoke me, trying to pull some kind of reverse psychology stunt. If I showed even a flicker of jealousy, if I tried to stop her, she'd call the whole thing off. And Liam? He'd lose everything. So if Zoe marries you, it's all over? The system, the cancer, you're free? I whispered. Yes, Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. It all ends. 7 years, Robert. I'm nearly 30. I'm exhausted. When do I finally get to sip that glass of wine? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a bank card. I looked at him, confused. He pushed it across the table toward me. His fingers lingered on it for a moment before pulling away. There's $89,000 in there, he said. Every penny I managed to save, despite cutting corners on everything else. My life, my energy, it's all been spent on Zoe. That's all I've got. He gave me a small, sad smile. Consider it your reward. The password is 137654. I didn't want Liam's payment, but he didn't take it back either. He just finished his glass of wine, then stood up and quietly made his way out, still sick, still dragging that frail body behind him. A moment later, Evelyn thundered down the stairs. That lying jerk finally left, she asked. What did he say? Nothing important, I replied, pocketing the bank card from the table. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Nothing? Then why the hell did he show up? Is Zoe really going to marry him? She is. There was no doubt about it, Zoe had completely lost her mind. Monica had pushed her over the edge, and now Zoe was hell-bent on making me pay. The next day, she organized a big family dinner, inviting relatives from both sides, at our house, no less. My parents thought she'd finally come to her senses. That maybe she was here to apologize, to patch things up. Mr. and Mrs. Livingston seemed relieved too. They sipped their coffee with smiles on their faces. This is the best outcome, Mr. Livingston said warmly. You two back together, it's what we've all been hoping for. As for Liam, we've already gone above and beyond for that boy. Not kicking him to the curb was generous enough. Exactly, added one of the aunts. Now that Zoe and Robert are engaged again, we'll cover Liam's medical bills. It's the least we can do. Everyone was cheerful, optimistic. Except Zoe. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me. The whole time. I ignored her. Then she let out a cold, scornful laugh and said, "Enjoyed that dance with Monica, didn't you?" The room went silent. Every conversation, every fork mid-air, frozen. Zoe, what are you talking about? Mr. Livingston snapped. What am I talking about? Zoe said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, come on. Robert's such a charmer. Managed to win over the top girl on campus. What a guy. Her words cut sharp and clean. His fiancée gets injured and he doesn't lift a finger, but when some other woman gets hurt? Oh, suddenly he's racing her to the ER, practically in tears. I shot her a look. What's your point? I already told you, I don't know you. I don't feel anything for you. Why can't I care about someone else? Zoe's face twisted with fury. She slammed her hand down on the table, eyes wet and blazing. You're still pretending you don't remember anything, huh? Still playing dumb? I'm not pretending, I said flatly. I genuinely don't remember you. But I remember Monica. Always have. I admired her then, and I still do. She confessed to me, and I said yes. It was a bombshell. The kind that sucks all the air out of a room. Everyone went stiff. Faces turned pale. Nobody moved. Zoe's lips curled into a bitter smile. Her voice trembled with rage. Of course. Of course you did. You know what? Fine. Great, even. Because I was already planning to marry Liam. Let's just call it even. You go your way, I'll go mine. She wiped her eyes quickly, spun on her heel, and stormed out without looking back. I watched her leave. I knew she wanted me to stop her. To say something. Anything. So I did. Wait. She froze mid-step, body tense. But she didn't turn around. What? She asked, her voice icy. I'm getting engaged to Monica the day after tomorrow, I said calmly. You should come. She flinched. I saw her jaw clench, her fists ball up at her sides, and her eyes shimmer with unshed tears. But she didn't say a word. She just walked out the door, and didn't look back. Zoe was gone. Just like that. The room was left in stunned silence. Our relatives sat frozen in place, confused, eyes bouncing from one face to another, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't offer an explanation. Instead, I left, headed back to campus, alone. The sky had that late afternoon hue, and the air was still. I wandered to the track field, and that's where I spotted her, Monica, walking aimlessly, lost in her own thoughts. That was just like her. She always loved walking around the track when she had nothing else to do. Back in college, guys would stake out the sidelines pretending it was a coincidence, just to cross her path. I strode across the field toward her. She hadn't noticed me yet. Just as I was about to tap her on the shoulder, her phone buzzed and she answered a video call. On the screen were clearly her parents. Monica, when are you coming back to the UK? Her dad asked, sounding a little impatient. Her mom chimed in right after, you really should hurry back. I've found a nice young man for you, he's incredibly handsome. Monica gave a soft laugh. No rush. I'm just enjoying being back at my alma mater for a bit. Aren't you in a hurry? Her mother repeated more and more anxiously. You're not a kid anymore, go home and let me introduce you to someone. Her dad sighed and hesitated, then added, Monica, you're almost 30 now, right? You've never even dated. You're not, well, listen, I'm warning you, you better not be. I nearly died of laughter. It turns out that Monica will also be urged to get married. I'm not. I'll head back soon, she said, clearly exasperated. She hung up the call and resumed her aimless walk, her expression unreadable. I bounced to her side with a grin. Hey there. Monica jumped up as if she had seen a ghost. When she realized it was me, she burst out laughing. Robert, you scared me to death. Then she cocked her head and asked with mock seriousness, tell me, which is scarier, people or ghosts? Stop right there. I'm not getting dragged into another debate, I said, throwing up my hands. God, she never changes. She nodded, still smiling. I didn't waste time. Pulled out my phone and opened the camera. Let's take a selfie. Monica blinked, caught off guard. For a second, she looked genuinely nervous, her whole face tensed up. What are you so nervous about? It's just a picture, I said, half amused. I don't know, she muttered. I never thought you'd want to take a picture with me. She was tense, but beautiful, more so in that awkward, uncertain moment. I snapped a quick photo anyway. No fancy poses. Just us. Posted on social media. Caption, I have a girlfriend now. Monica was stunned. She stared at my social media post like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Robert, are you serious? She asked, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded without hesitation. After all these years, you're the only one who ever really made me feel something. What about Zoe? She asked cautiously. Who? I replied, deadpan. Because honestly, I didn't know her anymore. Monica stared at me for a long beat, searching my face for any sign of doubt. Then, suddenly, she lit up and grabbed her phone. She called her parents again, voice bubbling with excitement. Mom, Dad, I've made up my mind. I'm staying in the US. I want to live here. She was already pacing as she talked. Didn't you both always say you wanted to move back, too? Once I'm settled, I'll bring you over. I promise. Her smile was pure light. As for me, I headed home feeling, finally, at peace. only to find Zoe standing outside my house, looking like a shadow in the dark. She stood rigid on the front porch, head bowed, body trembling just enough to notice. Her whole frame was buzzing with emotion, like a wire pulled too tight. I approached quietly. When she looked up, her face was pale, her lips trembling. "You're really with Monica now?" she asked, voice fragile and raw. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. She blinked, eyes wet. "Robert, do you really not love me anymore? Just because I tried to save Liam's life, you hate me for that?" "I'm sorry," I said clearly, calmly. "I don't even know who you are. How could I love you?" The words were heavy, but honest. Zoe's eyes shut tight. Her voice scraped out from somewhere deep, cracked and trembling. "Fine. Just, don't regret this. Don't you dare regret this." She turned and walked away without another word. I didn't follow. Moments later, the shouting started from her house. I heard Mr. Livingston yelling, Mrs. Livingston sobbing. Doors slamming. Voices rising. Everything boiling over. Then came the roar of an engine. I watched from my window as Zoe climbed into her sports car, with Liam. She pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Later that night, I saw her latest post on social media. "So lucky to have you in this life." That was the caption. There were 2 photos. One was a selfie of her and Liam. The other was their marriage certificate. "Robert. She's lost her mind, Zoe's completely lost it." Evelyn came storming toward me, her face pale with shock. "She went and married Liam, didn't she?" I said, deadpan. "Yes," she nearly shrieked. "She had a screaming match with the whole family, then marched off and registered the marriage like it was nothing. This is a disaster." She looked like she was about to cry. Guess I wasn't going to be her brother-in-law after all. And I could already see the next wave of chaos coming, 2 families about to go at each other's throats. The kind of tension that explodes at dinner tables and group chats and holiday reunions. Just the thought of it gave me a headache. "Evelyn," I said, calm as ever, "I'm heading out on a trip. Tell everyone not to bother looking for me, I'm fine. And besides, I've got Monica now. If I didn't escape now, I'd be buried in endless drama." That same day, before the relatives had a chance to descend, I threw a few things into a bag and disappeared. While on the road, I shot Monica a message. Asked if she wanted to come along. By nightfall, we were sitting side by side on a plane, sharing a look and a quiet smile. "Robert," she asked, leaning closer, "where are we going?" "Somewhere fun," I said. "We'll just keep going till we've had enough. Give it a month." A month sounded like enough time to let the storm pass. Monica didn't question it. She just followed my lead. We drifted from place to place, eating, drinking, sleeping in late, laughing too loud, living like the world had hit pause. And of course, we took care of each other, too. Like when her feet got cold on the plane, I pulled them into my lap to warm them up. And, well, once things got warm enough for her, they got warm enough for me, too. Some things don't need explaining. The trip ended. We came back to LA, refreshed and sun-kissed, like the real world had been nothing more than a distant echo. Monica barely had time to put her suitcase down before racing off to meet her parents, who had flown in that morning. She was buzzing with energy, texting me updates and promising we'd all go to dinner soon. She wanted to introduce me to them, officially. I was in. Later, I gave Evelyn a call, curious to know what kind of mess had unfolded while we were off the grid. "Robert. You're finally back," she groaned. "Ugh. Zoe's a wreck. She's spiraling, drinking, gambling, completely out of it." "That bad? It's only been a month. You think I'm exaggerating?" Liam divorced her. The day after they got married. Literally the next day. It was just for show. I sat up straighter. "What?" "Yeah, we were all stunned," Evelyn said, still trying to wrap her head around it. "We thought he married her for her money, that he'd freeload forever. But nope. No demands, no drama. He walked away without taking a single dollar." "And Zoe? She's been messed up ever since. She only married him to get back at you, and the second it was done, she regretted everything. She signed the divorce papers without blinking. Then Liam told her something, we don't know what, but after that, she just broke." Evelyn sighed, frustrated and sad at the same time. "She's completely unraveling." Suddenly, I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line, and then Evelyn's voice was drowned out. "Robert? Is that you?" Zoe's voice broke out into the phone, hoarse and filled with tears. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please come back. How could you forget about me? You were completing your mission as well, right? Is that why you forgot about me? Because I abandoned you? I blinked. What? Liam told me, she sobbed. He figured it out. You lost your memory because your mission to win me failed, and I was awful. I deserve this. I deserve it all. Just please, please come back. Her voice was guttural now, every word torn from someplace deep. But me? I felt nothing. Because I still didn't know who she was. I'm married to Monica now, I said, cool and final. Goodbye. Then I powered off my phone. Permanently. Still, I wasn't in the mood to go home just yet. I wandered through the streets instead, letting the city hum around me. As I passed the plaza near Wilshire and 7th, I spotted a familiar figure. Tall, lean, in a faded hoodie, sleeves pushed up. He was handing out flyers with the kind of enthusiasm that belonged on a stage. Passionate. Unapologetic. Liam. He was smiling under the afternoon sun, his movements light and rhythmic, the wind tugging playfully at his clothes. I stopped and watched him for a while. There was something poetic about it, the way he carried himself, like a man who had lost everything but rediscovered a piece of himself. Then he looked up and saw me. His expression shifted, just for a second, then he grinned. Coffee, he offered. There's a place around the corner. I've got a bottle of red in my backpack. I raised an eyebrow. Where'd you get wine? Zoe's place, he said with a shrug. Call it my severance package. I spent 7 damn years playing the loyal idiot. Figured I deserved her best bottle. I laughed. You're not wrong. Come on, he said, slapping my shoulder. Let's drink. And we did. 6 months later, Monica and I were married. We'd long since moved out of the old neighborhood. Life had settled into something soft and warm, predictable in the best way. Zoe, though, she'd hit rock bottom. In just half a year, she had unraveled completely. Drinking, gambling, drifting aimlessly. She'd trashed her health, burned every bridge. Her parents, heartbroken and exhausted, eventually gave up. They stopped trying to save her. Let her spiral on her own. I hadn't seen her since everything fell apart, until Christmas Eve. It was cold that night. I was walking downtown, the streets glowing with lights and laughter. That's when I heard the roar of an engine, saw the glint of a silver sports car weaving through traffic like it didn't care what got in its way. And there she was. Zoe. Still behind the wheel of that flashy car, though she looked half asleep. A cloud of smoke drifted from her lips as she stepped out, yawning, her arm lazily linked with a model-type guy who looked like he belonged in a cheap magazine ad. She was a far cry from the fierce, elegant woman she used to be. Now? She looked like someone who didn't know how to stop losing. Shit, she muttered, squinting at the crowd. Where the hell is that bar we went to last time? The model chuckled with a slur. I don't remember either, too many drinks. I think I blacked out. Zoe froze. She turned slowly toward him, eyes suddenly sharp and unblinking. Then, out of nowhere, she snapped. Don't you dare forget, she screamed. Don't you dare say that word. The guy flinched, confused. What? What word? Forget, she shouted, then slapped him across the face. You remember it now. Right now. Panicked, he pointed toward a neon sign half a block down. There. That way. I remember. Satisfied, Zoe started walking again, still dragging on her cigarette. But halfway there, something broke. She stopped. Dropped her smoke. And collapsed onto the sidewalk, sobbing uncontrollably. People stared but didn't intervene. The city had seen worse. I stood at a distance, watching. She had once sworn she'd never marry anyone but me. And now she was crying alone in the street, a shell of who she used to be. Time passed. Eventually, I ran into Liam again. No more flyers in his hands. No more fake smiles on street corners. He'd passed the civil service exam back in his hometown. After 7 years of setbacks and survival, those flyers had only been a way to keep the lights on. A temporary hustle. With his drive, it was only a matter of time before he made it. Now, he was getting ready to leave LA for good. Before heading out, he stopped by to see me one last time. He had a bottle of wine in his hand. I grinned. One last drink? Liam smiled back. Mr. Robert, I'd like to buy you a glass this time. I laughed. You don't need to be formal. It's not our first bottle. We drank together, talked a little, though mostly he talked and I listened. He told me about the exam, about going home, about finally seeing a future where he didn't have to grovel or scheme or survive by someone else's rules. He could finally sit back, cross his legs, and sip red wine like he'd always dreamed. A dream 7 years overdue. But tonight? We raised our glasses. And we drank. To freedom. To dignity.